When it comes to the movie world, independent production has dramatically changed, certainly over the course of my career. And today we're going to talk about just how you can succeed, how to be successful as an independent movie producer. I'm going to be talking to Simon Swart, who just recently was the executive producer on I Can Only Imagine. He's had a long career working with major studios in Hollywood. And we're going to find out some of the secrets behind the scenes of what it takes to be successful today in the world of independent film production. Well, I am thrilled to have Simon Swart on the episode today. We're going to be talking about independent filmmaking. And I think when I first met you, you were the executive VP for Fox for home entertainment. I think it may have been, right?
Yeah.
But there was
a distribution and marketing
distribution and marketing. And there was a long pathway to that. You're from South Africa. You're a surfer, hardcore, I might add. You can't believe this guy's garage is filled with surfboards. Why do you need that many surfboards?
Look, I figure surfing is one of the most Christian sports out there. It's very close
That's
to
where you become spiritual?
Very close to walking on water, and it involves constant baptism.
Okay, very good, very good.
So yeah, I'm pretty passionate. You need a board for every kind of wave. So.
That's a good point. All right, very good. Well, it's good to know you're not obsessed with filmmaking. You have some other interests as well. That's good. So you grew up in South Africa. Were you involved in filmmaking there before you came to the U.S.?
No, I was an art student who went to business school.
An art student who went to business school. That's an interesting combo.
It's like my Joseph experience.
Okay. So what ended up bringing you to the States?
I was kind of encouraged to leave. I was facing 5 years, well, I like to say 5 years free government accommodation and 3 square meals a day.
You were in trouble.
I was involved in a lot of the anti-apartheid activities, and I'd kind of offered to be a conscientious objector because I refused to serve in the military down there back then. Yeah. And that was going to get me 5 years in prison.
Interesting. So you were back, boy, that goes back a ways, being during the anti-apartheid days.
Yeah, it was pretty, it was the mid-'80s, and that was pretty much the dark days of apartheid. The country was in its 3rd or 4th state of emergency, and it was getting ready to explode. And it's quite remarkable to see what's going on there now. Yeah. To see the transition when Mandela was released, it was really just unbelievable. I would not have thought it possible in the mid-'80s that would have happened within 5 years.
Interesting. Wow, that's true. So, it was huge.
Yeah.
So you came to the U.S., but not to be a filmmaker.
No, I came to the U.S. I realized that if I was going to immigrate, a business degree was a better way to immigrate than an art degree. So there was a certain practicality that came along with that. Okay. And I came over here, had to convert all my degrees and do all that kind of stuff. And I kind of, sent my resume out. I was determined to be in the creative space. So, people ask me how I ended up in the studios. Well, I got rejected by every Christian music label on the West Coast.
That's where you tried first.
That's Christian where I tried first. I sent my resume out everywhere. I was like, I want to be in the music space. I'm an audiophile. It's like I love music.
Oh, wow.
And so that was my start. And honestly, I sent my resume out to so many different places and got nothing. It wasn't even crickets. It was like throwing bottles into the ocean.
For the record, when I graduated from college, I started keeping a file of all my rejection letters. I still got it, and it's pretty thick actually. In fact, I have worked with companies since then. We've had a couple clients over the years that had rejected me after college, and so I always remember to bring that up. I think it's healthy.
It's kind of like those rejection letters. I've also kept all my old report cards from high school. So when I want to get tough on my own kids, I'm like, now there's a perspective.
No, that wouldn't help me because that would just make Dad, see, I can get Fs, no problem. That's good. So it was business that was your pathway then, really?
Business was my pathway. It opened up a lot of doors for me. But there's still a certain randomness to it, right? So I sent my resume out to all these music companies, got nothing. I happened to be talking to a guy at a party in the South Bay, and he goes, I work for Warner Brothers. We're looking for a manager of international finance. You should interview. That was it.
Really?
That was it. I interviewed for that job. I got it. That was my first
international finance
job at Warner Brothers.
Wow.
And it was meeting a guy at a party. So networking. This was before there was an internet.
Yes.
Before we had social media.
That's true.
You know?
Well, there is something to be said. I actually have taught classes in networking because people think it's just about how to promote myself. But I'm telling you, particularly in our business, everybody I know pretty much in this town, which is huge, I just met through a party or an event or some conference or workshop or something, and you start rolling those into relationships, and it's amazing how much it can actually help.
Yeah, I think it is. It's about being social, trying to find your people, people that have common interests. I'd say in this country, but also it's about where you went to school. You know, you got a lot of college contacts. If you've been in the trenches working on school projects, those people that you're in school with, they'll become your professional network in the future.
Yeah.
So it's like really start honing your craft like when you're in school. And I had a daughter who went to film school.
Okay.
She interned every summer. She started building her network just by interning.
Very interesting. That's smart. Well, let me. Here's the interesting thing too with you is, I just think business is a much more viable route than people think. You know, everybody goes to film school today and they want to be a director, they want to be a writer, they want to be an actor. But you and I are good friends with Ralph Winter, who produces $150 million movies for a living. And he'll say, look, I've spent my career producing $100 million plus movies, but it's got to be green lighted by a business guy in development over at the studio. So they're the guys that decide.
People forget it's a business. It has to make money, right? You get to do it again if you make money.
That's a good point.
And really, as a creative, if you can get to a point where a failure is break even, and what I mean by that is every now and then we make movies that aren't as good as we thought they were going to be. Right? Nobody sets out to make a failure. True. Things go wrong. Things happen. Sometimes magic happens. Sometimes bad things happen. And you've got to have a plan for releasing, and that's a business proposition. Right? You've got to look at the numbers. You've got to be able to read the budget and go, am I in trouble or not? You know, as you're going through, am I getting the right number of days am I shooting the right number of pages every day? That type of thing. It is a business. It's a business proposition. And I find film schools today tend to focus on here's how to make a movie. Yeah. Right? And they tend to be a little light on here's how to finance it and here's how to make money. Yes. Because there's a difference, right?
Well, and there's very few film schools that partner with the business program to create a track for people who would become studio executives. Because the truth is, if studio executives are the guys that greenlight the films, I was just at the Producers Guild conference, and Toby Emmerich, who's the current chairman of Warner Brothers, was there talking, and he's ultimately the guy that's going to say yes or no. And so if the business track is the people that decide the movies that get made, they're the ones with the real influence out in the culture.
Yeah, and in fairness, it takes a village, right? Yeah. You know, people talk about the big sort of evil empires of the studios. They're not. They're big public companies. True. Right? And they're all about that bottom line, and that's how decisions are made, right? And it's about relationships, and it's not always coming from the creative side, but it's like how do we deploy our capital the most effective way? That's good. And as a creator, you have to think about that. It's true. Right? Because you've got to read into that. Really true. You might find a story that's amazing and wonderful and fantastic, but it doesn't mean it's a great movie. Yeah, that's a great point. You know? So you're in international finance. How do you make the bridge over to home entertainment? You know, it was just career choices along the way. Okay. I to be honest, I always believed I was going to be producing. Okay. That was a passion of mine really early on, but I didn't really know how I was going to get there. And again, I think for people coming through, they think automatically I'm going to jump right into, I'm going to be a producer. So I'm going to come out of college, I'm going to be a producer. I think I was probably a bit more pragmatic about it, where I said, I'm going to make decisions and career choices that get me closer to that, and that are enhancing my understanding, right? So I went through finance. I went through operations, logistics, supply chain. Lots of creativity there, but it's not what you would normally consider. And then I ended up in a head of sales, and I ended up running sales and marketing, and then running the whole distribution operation. And that really gave me an insight as to what was working and what wasn't working. That's good. And you could see what audiences want, learn how to position a project for the audience, but you always start with who your audience is. That's true. Right? Who's your market? Yeah. And I think at the peak, I mean, we were releasing probably 200 to 300 new releases a year, and most of them were theatrical. Wow! Because we were distributing for Fox, for MGM, for Dreamworks, for Lionsgate, etc. So we had just this massive through flow, and we could see, like I could see what movies were working, what weren't, and start getting an understanding of why, right? Because you always want to understand the failures.
That's true. That's true.
You know, I watched a lot of movies. I mean, actually, as a studio exec, I spent more time watching the smaller movies than I did watching the big movies, because I knew the big movies were going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because the whole organization was focused on that. And the idea there was is to maximize the profitability of those big movies, but it's the little movies where you could trip and stumble.
Yes, yeah.
And those movies
So true.
oftentimes were recovery projects too.
And in many ways, you were running distribution, home entertainment during the time it was the peak of the DVD world. I mean, DVDs were huge back then.
What was amazing is I found myself in a position, oddly enough, where we were charged with actually checking out all the new technology and assessing the new technology for how people are going to be consuming media. So literally went from the rental model to the purchase model, you know, to VHS, to DVD, to Blu-ray, to digital. So really I got to be in the middle of all those transitions, not just figuring out which technology was better, but how we were going to sell and market it.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. That's a good idea.
And it's interesting because it's a good note for filmmakers out there, is that remember that your legacy, the legacy of your movie project, is not going to be on the big screen. Although everybody should want to produce for the big screen and direct for the big screen, because it really is a fantastic experience when done right. But your legacy is going to be on an alternative format.
That's true.
So you have to understand that alternative format, because in 20 years, the greats like James Cameron, George Lucas, they understood that they put a lot of time and effort into the Blu-ray, and they were very supportive of what that next generation technology was, because they knew that's where tomorrow's audiences were going to find their films, their movies.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So staying up on technology is a critical part for a producer.
Oh, I think it's a critical part for a producer and a creative.
Yeah. And
I think, you know, the other note is too, as you touched on it briefly in the studio system, right? It's good to know these different facets of the creative, but it's not as simple as people make out. Like a great movie employs hundreds, if not thousands of people, and you need the very best specialists in each department role, right?
Right.
So, but having an understanding of each other's roles really helps. As a producer, you've got to understand how the whole thing comes together.
That's a great point. That's a great point. The big picture matters.
The big picture matters. You've got to make sure you're supporting your director, and oftentimes, you know, working with creatives. So I tend to be a little left brain and right brain. Working with creatives, it's all about how do you make the best possible movie, and, you know, supporting the director's vision. Yeah. Because ultimately he or she is in charge of the creative vision for the project, and we're there to support that.
That's a good point. So you distributed major movies like Avatar, Titanic, Star Wars, Bond movies, and then decided to actually make the final step to go into independent producing. You launched Intiba Pictures. Tell me about it. What finally pulled that trigger?
Well, I think what finally pulled the trigger for me was seeing what was going on with the disruption in the space. Okay. You know, with the streaming companies coming online, the incredible impact of Netflix and now Amazon and soon to be, you know, and Apple, et cetera, coming into the space. Yeah. And it seemed to me that there was a gap in independent film. As people were saying, you know, independent film, that all the independent divisions were struggling. It was becoming a much tougher space, and people were like, well, it's all going to streaming. So let's just make movies for streaming. Okay. And the studios were focusing on fewer, bigger movies for the big franchises, because that seemed to make sense for that business model. And yet the trend I'd seen for years is that movies that had rational budgets, and what by rational is like even in the 10 to 12 million range and under, and were very story-driven, had a couple of properties that I really came to understand, which is if you're using a good director and you've got A-list cast and you've got a good story, you should be able to get back to break even every time. What this new technology offers you with streaming services and these new platforms is an ability to get back to break even if the movie's not great. Interesting. Like, because every movie, like the number one releasing platform to unlock the value of your project is a theatrical release in the US. Okay. With a guaranteed screen count, your foreign value goes up.
Yes, I can see that.
And it locks in all your downstream revenues, and that's ideal. The problem with that is, if you spend $10-12 million making a movie, you need probably at least $10-12 million of P&A as well.
Yeah.
And that's usually
See,
where
now, a lot of people don't understand that. So essentially, whatever your budget is, double it, because when it comes to prints, advertising, promotion, marketing, you need your budget again to do the back end, right?
Yeah, I think you kind of you should go into it with that assumption, because the reality is, if the movie's not testing as well as you wanted to, you probably won't spend that much money.
Okay.
And you might do a platform release with a day and date streaming or digital, but you've got options at that 10 to 12 million range, right? Once you start going up north of $20 million in your production budget, you really kind of have one way out, or two ways out. You've got to have sold a ton of your foreign rights,
right?
Or you have to go theatrical. That means once you go over $20 million, your risk profile changes fundamentally. And I saw that so many of these movies in the 10 to 12 and under range, they were all getting to break even. A disproportionate share of them were getting to break even every time. And many of them, like 1 in 3, would break out to 40, 50, 60 million, and some of them even got over $100 million because they connected with the audience. They were fresh, they were new, they were original. And that should give, I think that's a lot of hope for independent filmmakers.
Oh, totally.
And that's the space that we're focused on.
So there's a lot of talk that because of all these platforms, it's a bad time because the prices are dropping and the cost, you know, you can't make such big movies. But what you're saying, and I totally agree with, is it's a more opportunity. It's more
opportunity, and
if you can control it.
Yeah, and we'll talk about decentralization in a little bit, because I think that's interesting. So in Tiba Pictures, what's unique about the company, I'm leading now, is we have the ability to finance our productions and finance the release.
Okay.
And we're only developing content for the U.S. market.
Okay.
Because we believe that if you can make it work in the U.S. market, it'll work just about everywhere else.
Yeah, it's not that you're developing just for market, but you want to make sure
it's universal.
It pays in the U.S. market before you go overseas.
Yeah, you don't want to tell just localized stories, because not all stories travel.
Okay. All right, side moment here. Intiba, where did that name come from?
So Intiba is kind of an Old Testament word. It's a bit of a mouthful. So actually, in the U.S. we're calling it NTB Pictures, but it's Intiba, and the translation is the ancient trodden paths. And why that's important is the kind of content that we're working on is going to be very commercial, but there's going to be a social message embedded in it.
Awesome.
There'll be a message that brings people together, and the point of it is that we have light we have to share, and we all think we're on this unique and original path, but the reality is we're actually kind of on the same journey in this life.
And for those who are Googling it, it's Ntibah, Intiba, Ntibah. I encourage you to Google it, check it out, see what he's doing there. And so how's it been so far since you've stepped into this world, this independent producing thing?
Terrifying.
That's good to know, and that's from somebody who spent years and years in the major studio system.
Yeah, it was quite a radical pivot.
Yeah.
But it's been very exciting, and certainly as a Christian, my faith has played a pivotal role.
Good, that's a good safety net.
And I really held on to what that plan was, and I actually found myself partnering up with people. Our parent company is a company called Talent 10 based out of South Africa.
Okay.
And they're an incredibly innovative group. They go into industries and they transform them. They innovate. They change the model. They ask the hard questions, but they're supporting the business. And I think it's amazing how we came together. We came together on a call to invest in a single project, and through this discussion, we realized that the Talent 10 guys had the other half of the business plan that I already worked on.
Interesting.
And as we exchanged business plans, they were like, you know what? Why don't we do this, and we'll produce together.
Yeah.
And we want you to run the company. We don't want to take just the project. We kind of want you to run the company. Be based in LA, because I think having those relationships and that experience and that location is important.
Wow.
So let's go. Let's do this. And it came to life immediately. It's kind of ironic that I'm now doing business in South Africa.
It is.
Which I love.
Full circle.
Yeah, because it's really, Africa is has amazing opportunity in general, and there's a lot of risk as well, though. And I just think people think of it as that other place. It's a third world. It's a third world continent.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there's so many amazing consumers there. The media spending in Africa is growing at one of the fastest rates in the world, but it's tiny.
Yeah, well, Nigeria has Nollywood, so they have their own film business going there, and it's pretty massive scale, actually.
Yeah, and I think
little films.
And I think, given my past passions, there's something really exciting to me about helping to build out the industry there.
True.
And I think as globally, whatever we can do to support the middle class in Africa and the creation of a middle class in Africa, and that's getting beyond film, but just on a macro level, I think that's really important. And there's such amazing creative voices in Africa that will blow you away. I mean, you see the amazing success of Black Panther. And you see how culture's finally kind of getting it. Yeah, true. And it's a really exciting time right now in all areas.
All right, let me go back. You mentioned being a Christian, and back when you were at Fox Faith, or back when you were at Fox Home Entertainment, you were instrumental in launching Fox Faith, which was their label to try to reach that faith and values, that inspirational audience. And it finally shut down, but probably because you were ahead of your time. I think it was very pioneering, but you're instrumental in helping. You and guys like Ralph Winter are instrumental in helping Hollywood understand the value of the faith market, right?
Yeah, I think it Fox Faith kind of ran its course, but what we wanted to do is prove that there was a market there worth serving, and I think it was very successful in that regard. Had a lot of just a tremendous amount of cumulative learning, but now you're seeing the studios really pay attention and go, what, there is a great market here.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I think the danger now is to keep doing what people have been doing. Okay,
right, that's good.
So for faith-based movies, to keep making faith-based movies isn't necessarily something that says that you've got a broad market movie.
Yes.
And I think where the faith space is going now is the millennial Christians or the millennial faith community wants authenticity. They want quality. They want A+ cinema scores. They don't want to be talked down to. Audiences don't want to be preached at when they're going to the movie. Now, the message can be there. It can be in there. But, pick the stories properly, and you don't have to. There's a model that works that says, I'm going to do a 2-hour sermon on tape. That's cool, but you've got to understand that you're narrowing your audience and you're limiting your studio appeal. And now you're seeing many of the major studios, including, Sony's done a great job, Lionsgate's done a great job, Paramount has definitely put a toe in the water for this, and Universal's looking at it. You're seeing studios going, okay, now how do we monetize this? How do we play in this area? And I think it's a very mysterious space in a way, because you don't want to be pushing a dogma or an agenda. And I think, the faith-based space is a very misleading term.
I agree. And, when you put together the film, I Can Only Imagine, you kind of hit the target pretty well with that movie. I mean, it was, $7 million film, 7.7, something like that to make? Yeah. And the last thing I found, it's made like, $83 million? It's doing very, very well. Yeah,
and, my partner, Cindy Bond, had the rights to that movie early on. Okay. And I'd known John and Andy and Kevin Downs for many years, and John and Andy, the
Irwin brothers.
The Irwin brothers. Yeah. Their first movie, October Baby, was one of the titles we were able to support under the Fox Faith label. Okay. But they accepted the challenge on that movie, and we were able to come through from them. And I've been a fan of theirs as filmmakers. Ever since. Yeah. They had a unique vision. They had an amazing shooting style, and it was they were the obvious choice to put on the movie, and they blew away everyone's expectations, of course. And it's kind of funny. I think you and I were talking at NRB a few months ago at the rollout of Kingdom Pictures and what the Irwin brothers are doing, and it's kind of cool. It's really a manifestation of this whole journey we've been on, and to have Lionsgate kind of double down, I think it's good for everybody. And TIBA is kind of a different animal, because we're really focused on the secular space, on the commercial space. first and foremost. And, we really kind of want to champion independent filmmakers.
Good for you.
We'll have capacity issues. We can't do 12 movies a year. We're going to have to be very selective.
Yeah.
And there are so many great projects out there, but we're looking for stuff that's got a really strong creative edge.
Yeah.
We have a picture coming out this year called I Am All Girls. And it's a movie directed by Donovan Marsh, who did the Spud movies,
right.
and he did Hunter Killer. He's an amazing director.
Huh.
And this movie just looks fantastic, but it deals with human trafficking.
Interesting.
And it's based on real events, things
Yeah.
that actually happened, and by the way, are actually happening today around the world. So it's kind of a dark subject matter, but we did a test screening in the US 6 weeks ago, and we were right at the norms.
Good.
Without a known cast.
Interesting.
And something like it was 85% of the audience said they want to get involved in fighting human trafficking where they were.
That's great.
And so
well, but
that's a thumbs up for me.
But I do like the social cause concept that you're trying to not just make a movie, you're making a movement out of some of these things, which I think are really important. And I think that the Producers Guild has a whole arm set aside to help encourage people to make that social entertainment kind of film project. And so I think it's really important. And I don't think there's a better place for Christians to be involved than there. Yeah. And now, just going back real quick.
And by the way, those movies where you connect to when you connect to our humanity and you give people hope, and you bring people together, way more commercial.
That's interesting.
Make more money all the way down the line.
Wow, that's fantastic.
When they're done well.
It's a positive business thing.
It's both, exactly.
Very good.
You can do good by doing good.
Now, going back to the faith-based thing, just one last thing here. You also were instrumental, you and Jacqueline Iloff, in launching Starlighter Films, which is kind of a advocacy group. I'm part of it. There's a number of filmmakers here in Hollywood that are part of it that are helping make the studios aware. Is this the goal, to make it aware that the faith-based audience is a viable audience?
Yeah, so Starlighter was really formed as a marketing and production conduit.
Okay.
And a kind of an incubator.
Okay. And
what we really wanted to do is get the kind of cast a vision for the future of where faith-friendly programming was going, and to try and formalize an interface between Hollywood and the creative community.
Brilliant. Okay.
And the churches.
Yeah.
Because I've heard it said so many times that Hollywood doesn't understand the church.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, the church doesn't understand Hollywood.
It goes both
so
ways.
It goes both ways.
Yeah.
And there's a massive disconnect in terms of the values, their missions, etc. And when you look at film, it is truly one of the most powerful and transformative media platforms, not just in the world and history. And talking about morality in movies, that's been around since the beginning of the movie industry.
True.
This is not a new discussion.
That's true.
Kind of brings us back to the ancient trodden paths. It's like,
right.
These discussions were happening in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
They're still happening now. That we're not going to stop talking about that. And some movies do really well. Some of them are commercial. Some movies are very sexual. Some of them are very violent. And they're very commercial. They do well, and people are going to keep making those movies as long as they do well.
Yeah.
But you know what? The good news is there's enough room at the table for everybody. Yeah. And you're seeing that with the bifurcation of audiences now.
Right. Well, starlighterfilms.com. I would encourage you to go check that out, starlighterfilms.com, just to see what Simon, Jacqueline, some other people are doing to try to make Hollywood. It's funny, in the early days, back when if I remember when you were at Fox Faith, I had a major production company in town, big, well-known director of big budget movies, came over to visit with me, and two of their producers came and they said, hey, we think there's a lot of money to be made in this faith-based film market, but we have no clue what that means. What is it? And so I explained to them a little bit about what it is, and they said, well, we have a script we'd like to leave with you. Would you just read it and tell us if you think it's faith-based? And it wasn't even remotely faith-based. Yeah. But you're exactly right. Hollywood, and it's not because they're evil. This is not an evil empire. They just weren't raised in this space. They don't get that world. And they're struggling to try to figure it out. And so what you've done, and I think of so many other Christians that have been kind of, laboring in this field in Hollywood for so long, trying to get the studio's attention, that there is a massive audience out there between LA and New York. And they're interested in movies that take faith seriously. I think that's the greatest line, the best line. And Mel Gibson, of course, opened their eyes to the fact that we call it passion dollars, that there's a lot of money to be made. But there's been a lot of, on the other side, there's been a lot of bad faith-based movies made. So part of what we're trying to do is also keep the studios from investing in dogs, so they can start focusing on really, really great films that will make an impact out there.
Yeah, and I think that's a profound insight to come in and say, hey, we don't know about the space, like, help us out. It is about having the discussion and the dialogue. Some of the other projects we're working on now is we're kind of taking an action-adventure approach to the Bible.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
So we have a couple of very exciting projects in development that will play that way, but they're going to be very big and commercial.
Wow, fantastic. All right, well, let's switch over here. You've learned a lot over your career. So there are a lot of young producers out there, a lot of experienced producers that are still struggling, or people that are trying to figure out how to make it out there. Give me a few tips. I mean, if you were talking to a young filmmaker, young producer now, let me start with this. Do you have to live in Hollywood to be successful today?
Absolutely not. I think that's one of the most exciting things that's gone on in the industry in the last 15 years or so, is there's this massive decentralization, right? We see a lot of talent. We see the creative community exploding in Georgia, for example. You see it exploding in Eastern Europe and England. It's always been strong in England, but countries like South Africa, Australia, you look at what Peter Jackson's done to New Zealand. Yes. In terms of putting it on the map. So with this explosion of technology and just the amazing quality you can get in the cameras and so on, it's completely decentralized. So you can produce and do your movies just about anywhere in the world now.
But the decisions are still made in Hollywood. If it's going to be a major movie, they're still made here. So you're here a lot. You have to deal with the studios, right?
Having the connection and the network really helps. Okay. And talking to other producers or young producers, it's I would say, just remember there's a difference between a story and a concept and an actual movie that's packageable, right? You might have an amazing story and you might have a concept, but that is like having a business idea without a business plan. Okay, the first step is you've got to have an amazing script. Yeah. And by the way, if nobody's connecting with the script, there's probably a reason why. So you've got to be really honest. As a producer, you've got to be really honest about the projects you're putting together, and not all of them are going to work.
This is a really good word, being brutally honest about your project, because a lot of people get so excited. It's my first movie, or it's my, I'm working on this project or whatever. I get so excited about it, but we often stop, and we need to stop and be brutally honest about, is this really going to work?
When you've shopped it around and gotten enough no's, the world is telling you something, and you got to hear that. And it might just be it's not the right time. It doesn't mean that it's not a great project. It just means it might not be the right time. So you don't want to be singularly focused on one project, for one thing. I think you've got to also look at projects and distinguish which ones are actually ready to be packaged. And if you have potential cast or casting agents reading the script and not connecting with it, you've got a problem. If you've gone to other directors and people aren't connecting, if you don't have a script, for starters, you've got a problem. And I would say try not to waste time in the early stages of development. Try and find stuff that's ready to go. As a producer, find stuff and develop relationships with directors, young up-and-coming directors, directors that have done stuff that's been, even if it's short-form content, people that actually know what they're doing, people that understand why you shoot the same scene 20 different ways and you get the coverage. And find people that have worked in the business, find people that have experience, try and partner up with people that have actually had some success.
Now, one of the big problems I see out there, particularly with faith-based films, Christians who are making movies, is that they spend their whole budget on making the movie, and they have no distribution relationship. They haven't pitched it to a distributor. They don't know what. They come to me, what do I do with this? They spend all their money to make the movie. They have no marketing budget, no advertising budget. They have no distribution possibilities. How do you, what would you tell those kind of guys? I mean, do you have your distribution locked in before you make the movie, or are you always talking to distributors? How does that?
I'm always talking to distributors, but at the end of the day, if you've got the P&A money, you can get distribution.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, you'll get the best possible terms on distribution too, but you've got to understand which distributors.
So don't waste all your money on producing. Make sure you've got some for the P&A, which is prints and advertising.
Yeah, and I think it helps if you're having that conversation with with your investors. And I mean, I think this was something that Imagine proved very well.
Yeah.
Because in the case of Imagine, we also brought the P&A. We brought the initial P&A, but our investors. When we spoke to your investors will understand you're protecting their investment, right? And they get the upside as well.
True.
So, I mean, that's kind of the key to that model. And it used to be, I mean, you and I have been on several panels together over the years. And I remember being on a panel many years ago, and I said, yeah, independent producers, like, try and raise P&A at the same time as you raise production. And there was just this like snickering throughout the audience, like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, sure.
Great, sure. It's like, and it's still true.
Yeah, it's still true.
I mean, just a lot of independent film loses most of their upside, and in many ways, that project can get hijacked when you've got to go for P&A.
Yeah.
And by then, you've taken all the creative risk.
That's true.
But again, you've also got to be realistic in your expectations. So one of the things I'll always do with young producers is say, okay, this is your project, this is your movie. Here's your budget. Who's your cast? And what movies do you think this is going to be most like? What's your end game? What's your vision for how this is going to end? And you'll be amazed how many of them will give you examples with movies that have budgets that were 20 times higher. Okay, great. You've just given me a movie that's $100 million budget, and you're going to do this with 2. We need to find better comps.
That's good. That's good. That's a good word.
And I think that's important. Managing expectations is half the battle.
All right, so let's land this plane here. If there was one thing you could say to creative people, producers, filmmakers out there that would encourage them, help them, solid advice, what would you tell them?
Work with people whose work you love. And don't take a project unless you absolutely love the project.
Oh, that's good.
Because you're going to have to be the champion for that project. So you've got to be passionate about it, and you've got to be willing to shape that and shift as you get feedback. Be a feedback monster.
That's good.
Right? Tell people, I want to hear your honest feedback. Tell me how I can make this better. Doesn't mean that everything they're going to give you is correct.
Right.
Take the stuff that resonates. Don't take stuff, but just be a feedback hound.
That's good.
And I think that's part of that honesty.
Yeah.
As you're developing the project, if people are saying no, find out why. Like try and
that's
get
good.
that.
Yeah,
well,
that's great. You know what? People ask my advice about something, but their eyes glaze over. I know they're not listening. It's just you got to listen.
It's like if you've written a script and you send it to someone and you go, trusted person.
Yeah.
Don't send it out into the universe, right? I mean, I get people sending me scripts all the time, and honestly, to do it justice, I'm going to have to commit at least 3 or 4 hours to that script.
Yeah, that's so true.
And it's like, and people like, I sent it to you 3 days ago. Have you read it yet? I'm like, my schedule's kind of packed.
Yeah.
And it's like that's development work.
Yeah.
Right? That's way down the list for me. It's like it's going to take a while for me to get there.
That's a good
I don't
point.
have a whole team to read coverage and stuff. I have a group of people that I work with that'll help me with that. But it's just being that champion, but also understanding what you've got and being willing to take that feedback.
So intibapictures.com, spell it for me.
NTHIBAH pictures.com.
Yeah, so that'll give us the update on what you're doing, what you're involved in.
Yeah, and look out for I Am All Girls. We're going to start, it's the movie that deals with human trafficking,
right.
And it's kind of like a revenge movie.
Perfect.
It's a lot of fun.
Cool.
But it's a lot of fun, but it's heavy, but it's entertaining. It's
I'm honored that you came on today. Thank you so much. And remember, share this with people. You know people that are out there trying to make movies, trying to get things made. This is going to be a real help to them. So share this episode, comment on it, give us a rating. That's going to help it move up in the search, and it's going to help people find it more often. So check us out at philcooke.com, PHILCOOKE, to find out what's coming up. And thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. And thank you. I'm
Thank you
grateful.
all.
Take care.